Admiral Hyun-woo Park stood on the bridge of the battlecruiser Eternal Storm, watching the stars through the wide viewing window. The ship moved quietly through space, patrolling the outer edges of human territory. It had been a peaceful day, like many others in recent months. The crew worked at their stations, checking systems and monitoring space around them. Captain So-young Kim walked up to the Admiral. She held a datapad in her hands and looked worried. "Sir, we're getting a strange signal from the deep space communication array. It's not coming from any human world." Park turned to face her. "What kind of signal?" "It's a distress call, but it's very weak. The signal has traveled a long way to reach us. It's coming from the Valdari Republic, about 3 star systems away from here." The Admiral knew about the Valdari. They were a peaceful group of alien races that had never bothered anyone. They grew crops, studied science, and stayed away from wars. Most humans had heard of them but never really interacted with them much. "Let me hear it," Park said. Kim pressed a button on her datapad. The bridge filled with a strange musical voice. The words were translated by the ship's computer, but the sadness in the voice was clear even through the translation. "This is Chancellor Theta 9 of the Valdari Republic. Our worlds are under attack. The Krex Dominion has invaded our space. We have no weapons of war. We have no armies. Our children are dying. If there is mercy left in this galaxy, please, someone help us." The message repeated 3 times, then stopped. The bridge was quiet for a moment. Everyone had heard stories about the Krex. They were giant insect-like creatures that conquered worlds and enslaved or ate other species. No one had ever successfully stopped them when they decided to attack. Engineer Dong-min Lee looked up from his workstation. "Sir, that message was sent 2 days ago. If the Krex are attacking them, there might not be much time left." Park nodded slowly. He had served in the human fleet for 20 years. He had seen wars and battles, but he had also seen what happened when good people were left to face evil alone. The Valdari had never hurt anyone. They didn't deserve what was happening to them. "Kim, send a message to Earth Command. Tell them about the distress call. Ask for orders." While they waited for a response, Park walked around the bridge. His crew watched him carefully. They knew their admiral was thinking about something important. The Eternal Storm was one of Earth's most advanced warships, but it was just one ship. The Krex usually attacked with hundreds of vessels. 2 hours later, the response came from Earth. Kim read it aloud to the bridge crew. "Admiral Park, you are ordered to respond to the Valdari distress call. Deploy Ghost Fleet Protocol. Other ships in your sector will join you. Remember, humanity remembers what it was like to be helpless. Show the galaxy what Earth's children can do." Signed, Fleet Admiral Chen. The crew looked at each other with surprise. Ghost Fleet Protocol was something they had trained for but never used in real combat. It was a new way of fighting that Earth's military had developed after studying how humans were different from other species in the galaxy. Park smiled for the first time that day. "Lee, prepare the ship for Ghost Fleet deployment. Kim, send messages to all human vessels in this sector. Tell them to meet us at coordinate 77 Alpha. Over the next 6 hours, more human ships arrived. They were not the biggest warships in the galaxy, but they were fast and carried weapons that other species thought were strange. The human fleet had 12 ships total, 3 battle cruisers, 4 destroyers, 3 carriers, and 2 support vessels. Dr. Mi-rae Choi arrived on the Eternal Storm from one of the support ships. She was a scientist who studied alien biology and had spent years learning about the Krex. Park met her in the ship's conference room along with his senior officers. "Doctor, tell us what we're going up against," Park said. Choi activated a holographic display that showed a large insect-like creature. The Krex are about 3 meters tall with natural armor that can stop most energy weapons. They have 4 arms, each ending in sharp claws, but their real strength is how they fight together. They think as one mind, plan as one mind, and attack as one mind. Commander Jae Sung-yoon, captain of the destroyer Silent Thunder, leaned forward. "How do we fight something like that?" "Every species that has tried to fight them used the same strategy," Choi explained. "They built bigger ships, stronger weapons, and tried to match the Krex strength for strength. It never worked because the Krex are simply too good at traditional warfare." Lieutenant Yoon-ji Nam, a young pilot, raised her hand. "So what makes us different?" Choi smiled. "Humans don't fight like other species. You improvise. You adapt. You do things that don't make sense to anyone else, including yourselves sometimes. The Krex have never faced an enemy that fights with chaos instead of order." Park stood up and looked at each of his officers. The Valdari are 3 days away at maximum speed. By the time we get there, some of their worlds might already be lost. But we're going anyway because that's what humans do. We help people who can't help themselves. The fleet began moving toward Valdari space immediately. As they traveled through hyperspace, each ship prepared for battle in its own way. The crews practiced combat drills, but not the kind other species would recognize. Human fighters trained to fly in patterns that seemed random. Gunners practiced shooting at targets while the ship moved in unpredictable ways. On the Eternal Storm, Park spent hours talking to each department head. He wanted to make sure everyone understood what they were about to do. This would not be a normal space battle. They were going to use tactics that the galaxy had never seen before. Engineer Lee showed the Admiral their newest weapons. "Sir, we've been working on these emotional guidance systems for the guns. The targeting computer learns from how the gunner feels about the target. It sounds crazy, but in tests it's 30% more accurate than normal targeting." Park nodded. Everything about human military technology seemed crazy to other species. Their ships were smaller and lighter than others, but somehow just as dangerous. Their weapons used old ideas mixed with new science. Most importantly, their crews were trained to think for themselves instead of just following orders. As the fleet got closer to Valdari space, they began receiving more messages. Some were from Valdari worlds that were still free, begging for help. Others were automated distress signals from worlds that had already gone silent. Captain Kim brought Park the latest intelligence report. "Sir, our scouts are reporting that the Krex fleet has at least 600 ships. 3 Valdari worlds have already fallen. The 4th world is under direct attack right now." Park looked out at the stars again. 600 Krex ships against 12 human vessels. Any sane military commander would turn around and go home. But Park remembered something his old teacher had told him years ago. The moment you start thinking like everyone else, you stop being human. He turned to Kim. "Send a message to all ships. Tell them to prepare for Ghost Fleet deployment. We're going to show the Krex something they've never seen before." The message went out to the human fleet. "Remember, we are not going there to die for the Valdari. We are going there to teach the Krex why the galaxy learned to fear Earth's children." As the fleet prepared to drop out of hyperspace, Park felt the familiar calm that came before battle. He had no idea if their plan would work. He only knew that somewhere ahead innocent people were dying and he had the power to try to stop it. That was enough. The human fleet moved through hyperspace like a pack of hunting wolves. Each ship was different from the others, built for a specific job but able to work together when needed. Other species in the galaxy often wondered how human ships could be so effective when they looked so strange. Commander Jae Sung-yoon stood on the bridge of his destroyer, Silent Thunder. The ship was smaller than most warships but moved faster than anything else in space. Its hull was painted black with white stripes that made it hard to see against the stars. The crew called it a ghost ship because it could appear and disappear without warning. Yoon watched his crew prepare for battle. They moved with quick, practiced motions, but each person did things slightly differently. Human crews were taught to adapt and improvise rather than follow exact procedures. This drove other species crazy when they tried to understand human tactics. Lieutenant Eunji Nam checked her fighter craft one more time. The small ship looked like it had been built from spare parts, with weapons mounted in odd places and armor that seemed too thin. But Nam knew her fighter could outfly anything the Krex had. Human fighters were built for speed and agility, not heavy armor. "The Krex think size equals strength," Nam told her fellow pilots. "They're about to learn they're wrong." On the science ship White Star, Dr. Mireille Choi continued studying everything they knew about Krex battle tactics. She had spent years collecting data from every fight the Krex had ever been in. The pattern was always the same. The Krex would surround their target with overwhelming numbers, then slowly crush any resistance. "They fight like a machine," Choi explained to her research team. "Every ship knows exactly what every other ship is doing. They never make mistakes because they never do anything unexpected. That's their strength, but it might also be their weakness." Choi had discovered something interesting in the old battle records. In the few times when Krex forces had retreated, it was always after facing something they couldn't predict or understand. Random equipment failures, unexpected weather, or wild animal attacks had sometimes confused them enough to make them withdraw. "The key is chaos," she said. "They can't fight what they can't understand." Captain Woo Jin Kang commanded the carrier Stormbringer. His ship looked like a floating city. with dozens of fighter craft and hundreds of crew members. But unlike other species' carriers, Stormbringer was designed to launch attacks from multiple directions at once. Human fighters didn't fly in neat formations like other species did. Kang met with his squadron leaders to discuss battle plans. "Remember, we're not trying to destroy their entire fleet," he told them. "We're trying to save the Valdari and show the Kreks that they can't win every fight." The squadron leaders nodded. They had trained for this kind of mission many times. Human military doctrine was built around the idea that a smaller force could defeat a larger one if it fought smart instead of fighting hard. Colonel Han-Nul, Shin prepared her orbital drop Marines for possible ground combat. The Marines were trained to fight in any environment, from space stations to planet surfaces. Their equipment was lighter than what other species used, but more flexible. "If we have to go down to the planet, remember that we're there to help people, not conquer territory," Shin told her troops. "Fight hard, but fight smart." As the fleet approached Valdari space, they began receiving detailed intelligence reports. The Kreks had deployed their standard invasion formation, a massive swarm of ships surrounding each target world. Their vessels were huge biomechanical constructs that looked like giant insects with weapons attached. The Kreks had 3 types of ships: warrior-class vessels for direct combat, harvester-class ships for capturing resources and prisoners, and queen-class command ships that controlled the entire fleet. Each ship was heavily armored and carried weapons that could destroy most other species' warships with single shots. Admiral Park studied the tactical displays with growing concern. The Kreks fleet was even larger than their intelligence had suggested. Nearly 800 ships surrounded the last free Valdari world. 3 other worlds had already gone silent, their populations either dead or enslaved. "Sir," Captain Kim reported, "we're receiving a final message from Valdari Chancellor Theta 9. The voice that came through the speakers was tired and sad. "Human ships, we know you are coming to help us. We are grateful beyond words, but please turn back. Do not let your people die for ours. The Kreks cannot be defeated by any force this small." Park listened to the message, then asked Kim to open a channel to all human ships. He wanted every crew member to hear what he had to say. "This is Admiral Park speaking to all Ghost Fleet vessels. In a few minutes, we're going to drop out of hyperspace and face an enemy that has never been beaten. They outnumber us more than 60 to 1. Their ships are bigger and stronger than ours. Any reasonable person would say we have no chance." Park paused, looking around his bridge at the faces of his crew. They watched him with calm determination. "But we're not reasonable people. We're humans. And humans have a long history of doing impossible things when someone needs help. Today we're going to add another chapter to that history." The fleet began its final approach to Valdari space. Each ship made last-minute preparations in its own way. Some crews sang old Earth songs to calm their nerves. Others performed equipment checks one more time. A few ships held brief ceremonies to honor the people they were trying to save. Engineer Dongmin Lee activated the experimental systems that made Ghost Fleet tactics possible. The ship's computers began running programs that had been developed by studying human psychology and behavior. Unlike other species' military computers that followed rigid programming, these systems were designed to learn and adapt during combat. "The computers are ready, sir," Lee reported to Admiral Park. "All ships are showing green status for Ghost Fleet deployment." Park nodded. "Send the order. Prepare to drop out of hyperspace in 60 seconds. As the countdown began, Dr. Choi made one final announcement to the fleet. "Remember, the Kreks have never faced an enemy like us. They expect us to fight like everyone else does. They're expecting formations, predictable tactics, and logical strategies. Instead, we're going to give them something they've never seen before: pure human creativity." The fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Valdari system. Immediately, their sensors were filled with the massive Kreks fleet. The insect ships moved in perfect geometric patterns around the dying Valdari world. It was like watching a swarm of giant metal locusts preparing to devour everything in sight. But the humans didn't immediately attack. Instead, they did something that confused every military expert who later studied the battle. They began broadcasting on all frequencies at once. Music from Earth filled the radio spectrum. Human voices reading poetry, telling jokes and singing lullabies mixed with the sounds of children playing and people laughing. It was chaos, but it was beautiful chaos that spoke of life and hope and the wonderful unpredictability of human existence. The Kreks fleet hesitated. For the first time in their recorded history, they encountered something they couldn't understand or categorize. The broadcasts weren't threats or battle cries. They were simply human voices being human. And in that moment of confusion, Admiral Park gave the order that would change galactic history. All ships, begin Ghost Fleet attack pattern. Show them what chaos looks like. The space around the dying Valdari world exploded into action as the human fleet began their assault. But it wasn't like any space battle the galaxy had ever seen before. Instead of forming neat lines and exchanging fire in organized volleys, the human ships scattered in all directions like leaves blown by a wild wind. Lieutenant Yoonji Nam launched her fighter from the carrier Stormbringer along with 40 other pilots. But instead of flying in formation, each pilot chose their own path toward the enemy. Some flew straight at the Krex ships, others curved around in wide arcs, and a few actually flew away from the battle before suddenly turning back. Nam spotted a group of Krex warrior ships moving to intercept her squadron. The insect vessels were huge, each one 10 times larger than her fighter. Their weapons could vaporize her ship with a single hit, but Nam wasn't worried. She had something the Krex didn't, the ability to be completely unpredictable. She rolled her fighter upside down and dove toward the largest Krex ship, then suddenly spun sideways and shot past its weapons. The Krex gunners tried to track her movement, but their targeting systems couldn't predict where she would go next because Nam herself didn't know until the last second. "This is Wildcard Leader," Nam called over the radio. "The bugs can't hit what they can't predict. Remember your training. Trust your instincts, not your instruments." Meanwhile, Commander Yoon's destroyer Silent Thunder lived up to its name. The black ship seemed to disappear and reappear throughout the battle zone. One moment it would be firing at a Krex harvester ship. The next it would be gone, only to appear somewhere else and attack a different target. Yoon used an old human military concept called guerrilla warfare. Instead of standing and fighting, his ship would attack quickly and then vanish before the enemy could respond. The Krex had never encountered this tactic before. They were used to enemies that stayed in one place and fought until they won or died. "Target the harvester ships first," Yoon ordered his crew. "If we can save the prisoners they've already taken, we might be able to evacuate some Valdari civilians." On the battlecruiser Eternal Storm, Admiral Park watched the chaos unfold around him. His ships were scattered across the battle zone, each one fighting its own separate battle. To any other species, it would look like the humans had lost all discipline and coordination, but Park knew better. "Systems report," he called to his bridge crew. Captain Kim checked her displays. "All ships are maintaining communication links. Damage is minimal so far. The Krex seem confused by our attack pattern." Chief Gunner Tae Hoseo looked up from his weapons console. "Sir, I'm getting target locks on 3 Queen-class command ships. Should I engage?" Park considered for a moment. The Queen-class ships controlled the Krex fleet's coordination. Destroying them might break up the enemy formation, but it would also make the battle more chaotic. "Fire when ready, Gunner. Let's see how they handle losing their command structure." The Eternal Storm's main guns fired a spread of kinetic projectiles at the nearest Krex command ship. The metal slugs moved so fast they were almost invisible, but they hit with the force of small meteors. The Krex ship's bioarmor cracked under the impact, and green fluid began leaking into space. The attack on the command ships had an immediate effect. The perfect geometric formation of the Krex fleet began to break down as individual ships lost contact with their central coordination. Some Krex vessels continued attacking the human ships, but others began moving randomly, unsure of what to do without orders. Dr. Choi monitored the battle from her science station. "Admiral, the emotional guidance systems are working better than we hoped. Our hit rate is 43% higher than normal combat statistics. The emotional guidance weapons were one of humanity's strangest military innovations. Instead of relying only on computer calculations, the targeting systems also used the gunner's feelings about the target. If a gunner was angry at an enemy ship, the weapons would focus on destroying it completely. If the gunner felt protective of allied ships, the weapons would prioritize defensive fire. Other species thought this was ridiculous. How could emotions make weapons more accurate? But humans had learned that their feelings often contained information that their conscious minds missed. A gunner might feel that an enemy ship was about to change course a split second before it actually happened. Captain Wu Jin Kang coordinated the fighter attack from the Stormbringer. His carrier had launched over 100 small craft, and they swarmed through the battle zone like angry hornets. But unlike hornets, each human fighter pilot made their own decisions about where to go and what to attack. Remember, Kang broadcast to all fighters, you're not trying to destroy everything. You're trying to create confusion, make them wonder what you're going to do next. Lieutenant Nam found herself flying directly between two massive Krex warrior ships. Both vessels fired at her simultaneously, but instead of hitting her fighter, their energy beams struck each other. The collision created a brilliant explosion that damaged both ships. Did you see that? Nam laughed over the radio. I got them to shoot each other. This kind of accident would have been impossible in a normal space battle where ships stayed in careful formations. But in the chaos of human-style combat, strange things happened constantly. Krex ships found themselves firing on their own allies, colliding with each other, or wasting ammunition on targets that were no longer there. The Krex tried to adapt to the human tactics, but they faced a fundamental problem. Their entire military culture was based on order and predictability. Every Krex warrior was trained to follow specific procedures in specific situations. When faced with a situation they had never encountered before, they didn't know how to respond. Engineer Lee monitored the battle from his station on the Eternal Storm. Sir, I'm detecting massive confusion in the Krex communication networks. They're sending contradictory orders to their own ships. Park smiled grimly. That's exactly what we wanted. A confused enemy is a defeated enemy. The battle had been raging for 2 hours when something unprecedented happened. A group of Krex ships began retreating from the combat zone, not because they were destroyed or disabled, but because they simply couldn't understand what was happening around them. The retreat started with a single harvester ship that had been repeatedly attacked by human fighters. The ship's crew, overwhelmed by the unpredictable assault pattern, decided to withdraw to a safe distance. When other Krex ships saw one of their own retreating, they began to question their own orders. This is incredible, Dr. Choi reported. The Krex are actually retreating. I've never seen anything like this in all my research. But Admiral Park knew the battle wasn't over yet. The main Krex fleet was still intact, and they still outnumbered the humans by a huge margin. The retreat of a few ships was encouraging, but it wouldn't save the Valdari world by itself. All ships maintain attack pattern, Park ordered. We've gotten their attention. Now we need to keep the pressure on. As the battle continued, something else began to happen. The Valdari on the planet below had been monitoring the fight through their communication systems. For the first time in days, they heard sounds of hope instead of despair. Chancellor Theta 9 sent a message to the human fleet. We don't know how you're doing this, but our sensors show that the Krex bombardment of our cities has stopped. You've given us something we thought we'd lost forever. Hope. Park felt a moment of satisfaction, but he knew the hardest part was still ahead. The Krex would eventually figure out some way to counter human tactics. When that happened, the real test would begin. The battle had been raging for 4 hours when the Krex finally began to adapt to human tactics. The insect warriors were not stupid, just rigid in their thinking. After watching the chaotic human attack patterns, some of their commanders started to understand what was happening. A massive Krex queen ship, twice the size of any human vessel, began broadcasting new orders to the remaining fleet. Instead of trying to maintain perfect formations, the Krex ships spread out and began attacking in smaller groups. They couldn't match human unpredictability, but they could at least try to reduce the confusion. Admiral Park watched this development with growing concern. They're learning, he told Captain Kim. We need to step up our efforts before they figure us out completely. Lieutenant Nam led her fighter squadron in a desperate attack on the new Krex formation. Her small craft darted between the massive insect ships like birds flying through a forest of metal trees. But the Krex gunners were getting better at tracking the erratic human flight patterns. Wildcard 3 is hit, came a voice over the radio. Nam looked back to see one of her pilot's fighters spinning out of control, trailing fire and debris. I've got you 3, called another pilot, breaking off attack run to provide cover. This was another thing that confused the Krex. Humans would interrupt their own attacks to help wounded comrades. The insect warriors were programmed to complete their missions regardless of casualties. They couldn't understand why humans would sacrifice tactical advantage to save a single pilot. On the destroyer Silent Thunder, Commander Yoon found himself surrounded by 6 Krex warrior ships. His vessel was fast, but even human ships had limits. The Krex had finally managed to coordinate their movements enough to trap one of the elusive human vessels. "All power to engines," Yoon ordered his crew. "Prepare for ramming speed." His crew looked at him with surprise. Ramming was considered a last resort tactic that usually resulted in the destruction of both ships involved. But Yoon had a different plan. The Silent Thunder accelerated directly toward the largest Krex ship, as if intending to ram it head-on. The Krex vessel prepared for impact, reinforcing its forward armor and bracing for collision. But at the last moment, Yoon spun his ship sideways and fired all weapons at point-blank range into the enemy's weakened side armor. The Krex ship exploded in a brilliant flash of green and orange fire. The explosion was so close that it damaged several other Krex vessels and created a gap in their formation that Yoon used to escape. "That," Yoon announced to his crew, "is why humans are dangerous. We don't just think outside the box, we redesign the box while we're fighting." Chief Gunner Taeho, SEO, had been fighting his own battle on the Eternal Storm. His emotional guidance weapons had been scoring hit after hit on Krex targets. But now the enemy was adapting to his attack patterns too. The Krex ships were using random evasive maneuvers to try to match human unpredictability. "Sir," SEO reported to Admiral Park, "they're copying our tactics. My hit rate is dropping." Park nodded. He had expected this. Switch to Pattern 7. Pattern 7 was something the human fleet had practiced but never used in real combat. Instead of trying to be unpredictable, they would become hyper-predictable for exactly 60 seconds, then switch back to chaos mode. The sudden change would confuse enemies who had just adapted to random behavior. The entire human fleet suddenly began moving in perfect formation, just like traditional space navies. They fired their weapons in coordinated volleys and maintained precise distances from each other. For 60 seconds, they fought exactly like every other species in the galaxy. The Krex fleet, which had just adapted to chaos, found itself facing traditional tactics and had to adapt again. But just as they began to respond to the new pattern, the humans switched back to random behavior. The rapid change broke the concentration of many Krex crews. Dr. Choi monitored the enemy response from her science station. "The confusion is spreading through their communication network," she reported. "Some ships are following old orders, others are trying to adapt to our formation fighting, and a few are still responding to our chaos tactics." The result was exactly what the humans had hoped for. The Krex fleet began fighting itself. Ships following different tactical programs got in each other's way. Some Krex vessels tried to form defensive formations while others attempted individual attacks. Several collisions occurred as ships moved according to conflicting orders. Colonel Hanyul Shin had been waiting for her chance to contribute to the battle. Her orbital drop marines were trained for ground combat, but she had an idea for how they could help in space. "Admiral," she contacted Park, requesting permission to attempt a boarding action on that damaged Queen ship. Park looked at the tactical display. One of the Krex command vessels had been badly damaged by human attacks and was drifting without power. It was still heavily defended, but a small team might be able to get inside and cause more damage. "Approved, Colonel. But remember, this is a rescue mission first and a military operation second." Shin led 20 Marines in an assault shuttle toward the crippled Krex ship. The small craft was fast and heavily armed, designed to punch through enemy defenses and deliver troops to hostile environments. As they approached the alien vessel, Shin could see how different it was from human ships. The Krex ship looked like it had been grown rather than built, with curved organic lines and surfaces that seemed to pulse with their own life. It was beautiful in an alien way, but also deeply disturbing. "Remember," Shin told her Marines, "we're looking for Valdari prisoners. According to intelligence, they keep captives in the lower levels of their ships." The assault shuttle attached itself to the Krex ship's hull and began cutting through the armor. The Marines poured through the breach wearing heavy combat suits designed for fighting in alien environments. Inside the ship, they found corridors that were too tall and too narrow for human comfort. The walls were covered with what looked like living tissue, and everything had a strange, sweet smell that made them grateful for their suit filters. They also found something else. Hundreds of Valdari prisoners crammed into holding cells. The peaceful aliens looked up at the armored humans with hope and fear mixed together in their large eyes. "We're here to help. Shin told them through her suit's translator. "Can you move? We need to get you off this ship." The rescue operation became a race against time. More Krex warriors were heading toward their location, and the human Marines had to evacuate the prisoners before being overwhelmed. They worked together to guide the Valdari civilians through the damaged ship toward the assault shuttle. Meanwhile, the space battle continued to rage around them. Lieutenant Nam had regrouped her fighter squadron and was leading attacks on Krex ships that were trying to reinforce the boarding action. Her pilots flew desperate holding patterns, keeping enemy reinforcements away from the rescue operation. Engineer Lee had been monitoring all systems during the battle, and he noticed something interesting in the data streams. "Admiral, I'm detecting unusual energy readings from several Krex ships. I think their power systems are overloading." Park studied the readings. The Krex ships used biomechanical technology that was very different from human engineering. The stress of the chaotic battle, combined with the conflicting orders their crews were trying to follow, seemed to be causing system failures throughout their fleet. "How many ships are affected?" "At least 30% of their fleet is showing signs of power instability," Lee reported. "If we can maintain pressure for another hour, some of them might start breaking down on their own." This was an unexpected advantage. Human ships were designed to function under stress and adapt to changing conditions. Krex vessels, built for perfect coordination and predictable operations, were not handling the chaos as well. Captain Woojin Kang saw an opportunity and launched his remaining fighters in a coordinated assault on the most damaged Krex ships. "All squadrons focus on targets showing power fluctuations. Let's help them break down a little faster." The tide of battle was turning, but Admiral Park knew they couldn't maintain this pace much longer. His ships were taking damage, his crews were exhausted, and ammunition was running low. They needed to find a way to end the fight soon, or the Krex would eventually overwhelm them through sheer numbers. That's when Chancellor Theta 9 contacted the human fleet with unexpected news. "Admiral Park, our defense satellites are coming back online. If you can keep the Krex distracted for another 30 minutes, we might be able to help you finish this battle." The final phase of the battle began with a sound that no one expected: the Valdari defense satellites activating after days of silence. The peaceful aliens had never been warriors, but they had built defensive systems to protect their worlds from natural disasters and space debris. Now those same systems were turning their sensors and communication arrays toward the Krex fleet. Chancellor Theta 9's voice came through the communication channels with new strength. "Admiral Park, our satellites can't fight, but they can do something else. We're flooding all frequencies with information about Krex war crimes, their invasion plans, and their weaknesses. Every species in this part of the galaxy will know what's happening here." This was psychological warfare on a scale the galaxy had never seen. Within minutes, the news of the battle was spreading to dozens of star systems. Other species that had remained neutral were suddenly forced to choose sides. The Krex had always relied on fear and isolation to win their wars, but now their enemies would know they could be defeated. Admiral Park felt a moment of hope, but the battle was far from over. His fleet was down to 8 functioning ships, and they were still outnumbered 40-1. Colonel Shin's Marines had successfully rescued 200 Valdari prisoners, but they were now trapped on the damaged Krex ship with enemy reinforcements closing in. "All units, we need to buy the rescue team more time," Park ordered. "Execute Final Protocol." Final Protocol was the most desperate tactic in the human military handbook. Every ship would attack the largest enemy target they could find, using whatever weapons and methods were available. It was designed to cause maximum chaos and damage in the shortest possible time, regardless of the cost. Lieutenant Nam led her remaining fighters in a suicidal assault on the largest Krex queen ship. The massive vessel was the size of a small city, with weapons that could destroy her entire squadron with a single volley. But Nam wasn't trying to destroy it, she was trying to distract it. "This is for everyone who ever said humans were too small to matter," Nam said over the radio as she dove toward the enemy ship. Her fighters scattered in all directions around the queen ship, firing at its sensors and communication arrays. They couldn't penetrate its heavy armor, but they could blind it and make it deaf to the commands of other Krex vessels. Commander Yoon's destroyer Silent Thunder had taken heavy damage, but it was still functional. He aimed his ship at a group of Krex vessels that were moving to intercept the rescue operation. Instead of trying to fight them, he did something that shocked everyone watching the battle. Yoon activated his ship's self-destruct sequence, but instead of detonating immediately, he set it on a timer. Then he aimed the Silent Thunder at the center of the Krex formation and accelerated to maximum speed. "This is Silent Thunder," Yoon announced. "All hands abandon ship. Shuttle crews pick up survivors and get clear." The crew evacuated in emergency shuttles while their ship continued its final charge toward the enemy. The Krex ships tried to destroy the incoming destroyer, but their fire only made it explode sooner. The massive detonation destroyed 3 Krex vessels and damaged 6 others, creating a gap in their formation that allowed the rescue shuttles to escape. On the Eternal Storm, Chief Gunner Seo had been saving his most powerful weapons for the end of the battle. The emotional guidance systems had been learning from his feelings throughout the fight, and now they contained something more than anger or determination. They contained 5 hours of human sacrifice, courage, and love for people they had never met. "Admiral," Seo reported, "the weapon systems are showing readings I've never seen before. It's like they understand what we're fighting for." Park nodded. "Fire everything we have, Gunner. Show them what humanity looks like when we're protecting our friends." The Eternal Storm's weapons blazed with unprecedented accuracy and power. Every shot found its target, and every target suffered massive damage. The emotional guidance systems had learned not just to fight, but to fight for something greater than victory. Dr. Choi watched the data streams with amazement. "The weapon accuracy is at 97%. That should be impossible, but the computers are somehow predicting enemy movements 5 seconds before they happen." Meanwhile, Colonel Shin was leading her Marines and the rescued Valdari through the damaged Krex ship toward their extraction point. They had to fight through several groups of insect warriors, but the Krex seemed confused and disorganized. The constant chaos of the space battle had affected their coordination even inside their own ships. "Ma'am," one of her Marines reported, "I'm detecting massive system failures throughout this ship. The whole thing is starting to fall apart." Shin looked around at the alien corridors. The biomechanical walls were cracking, and strange fluids were leaking from damaged systems. The Krex technology wasn't designed to handle the kind of stress that came from fighting an unpredictable enemy. "Move faster," she ordered. "We need to get out of here before this whole ship comes apart." They reached the extraction point just as Captain Kang's fighters arrived to provide cover. The rescue shuttles loaded with Valdari, civilians and exhausted Marines, just as the Krex ship began to break apart from internal failures. The space battle had been raging for 7 hours when something unprecedented happened. The Krex fleet began a general retreat. Not a tactical withdrawal or a regrouping maneuver, but a full retreat from the system. The insect warriors had finally encountered something they couldn't understand or overcome: the willingness of a smaller force to sacrifice everything for people they barely knew. Every military computer in the Krex fleet calculated that the humans should have surrendered hours ago, but they kept fighting with increasing determination. Admiral Park watched the enemy ships fleeing toward the edge of the system. His fleet was in ruins. Only 4 ships were still combat capable, and those were badly damaged. But they had achieved something that military experts said was impossible. They had defeated the Krex in open battle. Chancellor Theta 9's voice came over the communication system one more time. "Admiral Park, we don't have words to thank you. Our world is safe, our people are free, and our children will grow up knowing that someone came when we called for help." But the real impact of the battle was only beginning to be felt. The news broadcasts from the Valdari satellites had reached dozens of star systems. Other species that had lived in fear of the Krex were suddenly asking themselves a simple question: if humans could defeat them, why couldn't we? Dr. Choi compiled her final battle report as the human ships began rescue and repair operations. "This battle will change everything," she told Admiral Park. "We didn't just defeat a Krex fleet, we proved that they can be defeated. Every species in the galaxy will know that now." The Galactic Council convened an emergency session within days of the battle. Ambassador Sujin-Oh represented Earth at the proceedings, where she made a simple statement that would be remembered for generations. "Earth's children didn't come to the Valdari because we had something to gain. We came because it was the right thing to do, and we'll do it again for anyone who needs help." The Krex Dominion, faced with the possibility of fighting multiple enemies using human-inspired tactics, agreed to peace negotiations for the first time in their history. Other aggressive empires suddenly found their expansion plans much more difficult, as smaller species began organizing mutual defense agreements based on the human model. Lieutenant Nam, promoted to squadron leader after the battle, summed up the human philosophy in a speech to new fighter pilots. "We don't fight because we hate what's in front of us. We fight because we love what's behind us. And when you fight for love instead of conquest, you become capable of impossible things." Admiral Park stood on the repaired bridge of the Eternal Storm as his fleet prepared to return to Earth. The ships were scarred and battered, but they flew with pride. They had proven something important not just to the galaxy, but to themselves, that doing the right thing was always worth the cost. As the fleet entered hyperspace for the journey home, they left behind a small communication beacon in orbit around the Valdari world. Its message was simple and broadcast on all frequencies. "If you need help, call us. Earth's children are listening." The beacon would remain there for years, becoming a symbol of hope for oppressed peoples throughout the galaxy. And whenever species faced enemies too powerful to defeat alone, they would remember the day when 12 human ships answered a call for help and changed the course of galactic history. The story of the Battle of Valdari became legend, told and retold across 1,000 worlds. But for the humans who fought there, it was just another day of doing what their species had always done, standing up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves, no matter the odds.